The tears streamed down Emma Vaughn's face as she clutched her wedding dress, the pristine white fabric now soiled with dust and desperation. She had run from the church just moments before saying "I do" to a man she did not love, a man whose cruel nature had been revealed to her too late. Now, crouched behind the small wooden church in Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878, Emma fought to control her breathing as she heard the shouts of the wedding party searching for her. "Emma, Emma, you get back here this instant." Her father's voice carried on the hot summer air, filled with rage and embarrassment. She pressed herself against the weathered boards of the church, the rough wood snagging the delicate lace of her veil. The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart race, and she squeezed her eyes shut, praying for invisibility. "Madam," a deep voice, gentle and unfamiliar, caused her eyes to fly open. Before her stood a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hat was pushed back on his head, revealing tousled brown hair. He wore the practical attire of a cattleman-worn denim, scuffed boots, and a simple white shirt with a leather vest. "A cowboy not from their town. Please," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't tell them where I am." He crouched down beside her, his movements slow and careful as if approaching a spooked horse. "I reckon you've got good reason to be hiding behind a church on your wedding day." Emma nodded, clutching her bouquet of wilting wildflowers. "I can't marry him." "I just can't." The stranger studied her face for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Name's Jackson Edwards. I've got a horse tied up behind the livery. If you're of a mind to truly escape, I can help you." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion, even as hope fluttered in her chest. "Maybe not," Jackson replied, a small smile touching his lips. "But I know trouble when I see it, and something tells me you're running from the real trouble, not causing it." He extended his hand. "What do you say? You want to stay here and get caught, or take a chance?" Emma looked at his outstretched hand. She could hear her father and Thomas Blackwater, her would-be husband, getting closer. Thomas's family owned half the businesses in town, and her father had been all too eager to marry her off to secure his own financial interests. The bruises Thomas had left on her wrist last week, when she'd questioned him about his business dealings, had been all the confirmation she needed that this marriage would be her prison. "I'll come with you," she said, placing her trembling hand in his. Jackson nodded, his expression serious. "Stay low and follow me." He peeked around the corner of the church, then looked back at her. "We're going to have to make a run for it. Can you manage in that dress?" Emma gathered the voluminous skirts of her wedding gown, tucking them up and securing them. "I can manage. On my count, then." 1, 2, 3, they burst from behind the church, Jackson leading her by the hand as they raced across the open ground between the church and the cluster of buildings that made up Willow Creek's modest downtown. "There she is," Thomas's angry voice carried across the distance. "Run faster." Jackson urged, tightening his grip on her hand. Emma's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, the borrowed boots beneath her wedding dress slapping against the hard, packed dirt. The livery stable came into view, and Jackson guided her behind it, where a magnificent chestnut stallion stood waiting. "Up you go," he said, cupping his hands to give her a boost. Emma gathered her skirts and placed her foot in his hands, allowing him to hoist her onto the horse. Jackson swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins. "Hold on tight," he whispered near her ear, and then they were off, the horse's powerful muscles propelling them forward as shouts of anger faded behind them. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, the landscape changing from the small town to open prairie dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Emma was grateful when Jackson finally slowed the horse to a walk as they approached a small creek. "We should rest here," he said, dismounting and reaching up to help her down. "Get some water and make a plan." Emma's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. She'd been clinging so tightly to the saddle that her hands were cramped, and every muscle in her body ached from the tension. Jackson steadied her with a firm but gentle grip on her elbow. "Thank you," she said, the full weight of what she had done beginning to settle on her shoulders. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Jackson shook his head as he led his horse to the creek. No need for that. I couldn't rightly leave a lady in distress. He glanced at her wedding dress, now torn and dirty from their escape. Though I am curious what drove you to such desperate measures. Emma sank down onto a flat rock near the water's edge, her fingers working to remove the veil that was still tangled in her hair. Thomas Blackwater is not the man everyone in town believes him to be. He's cruel and calculating. My father arranged the marriage to settle some debts and secure a business partnership. Her voice trembled. Last week, Thomas showed me what would happen if I ever defied him once we were married. Jackson's expression darkened. He hurt you, Emma nodded, pushing up the sleeve of her dress to reveal the yellowing bruises on her arm. This was for asking about rumors I'd heard about his business practices. He said a wife had no business questioning her husband. A muscle twitched in Jackson's jaw as he looked at the marks on her skin. No man has the right to treat a woman that way. He turned away, focusing on unsaddling his horse and giving it a good rub-down. Where will you go now? The question hung in the air as Emma realized she hadn't thought beyond escape. I have an aunt in California. She wrote to me last year after my mother died, inviting me to visit. Perhaps she would take me in. California's a fair piece from here, Jackson said, settling the saddle on the ground. And Blackwater doesn't strike me as the type to let go of what he considers his property easily. He hesitated, then added, I'm heading to my brother's ranch near Flagstaff. You'd be welcome to travel with me that far. It's in the right direction, and you'd have safety in numbers. Emma studied the cowboy who had come to her rescue. There was something about his direct gaze and quiet confidence that made her want to trust him, despite the warnings that had been drilled into her about strange men. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know anything about me. Jackson shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I know enough. You've got courage, running away from a bad situation instead of resigning yourself to it. That says something about your character. He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. Besides, my mama raised me right. She'd tan my hide even now if I left a lady to fend for herself. Emma accepted the canteen, taking a long drink of the cool water. Well, Mr. Edwards, it seems I'm in your debt regardless. I accept your offer of escort to Flagstaff. Just Jackson, please, he said, settling himself on the ground nearby and pulling his hat low over his eyes to shield them from the sun. We should rest here for a bit, then push on before dark. I know a place a few miles ahead where we can make camp for the night. As they sat in companionable silence, the reality of her situation began to truly sink in. Emma had left everything behind her home, her few possessions, her father. She had nothing but the ruined wedding dress on her back and whatever future she could carve for herself. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I don't even know your name, Jackson said suddenly, tilting his hat back to look at her. Emma, she replied. Emma Vaughn. Well, Emma Vaughn, he said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. I have a feeling this is the beginning of quite an adventure for both of us. Emma couldn't help but return his smile, feeling for the first time in years that perhaps her life could be more than the narrow existence that had been planned for her. I believe you might be right, Jackson Edwards. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they mounted up again, Emma sitting side saddle as best she could in her cumbersome dress. Jackson's strong presence behind her was reassuring as they rode deeper into the wilderness, leaving the life she had known far behind. They traveled until dusk painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jackson guided his horse to a sheltered area where a small overhang of rock offered protection, and the remains of an old campfire indicated it was a place he had used before. Home for the night, he announced, helping Emma dismount. She winced as her feet touched the ground, unaccustomed to so many hours on horseback. I'm afraid I'm not much of a horsewoman, she admitted, trying to massage feeling back into her legs. You'll toughen up, Jackson assured her, already setting about gathering wood for a fire. First time I spent a full day in the saddle, I could barely walk for a week. My brother never let me hear the end of it. Emma smiled at his attempt to make her feel better. May I help with anything? You could fill the coffee pot at that stream just over there, he suggested, pointing to where water bubbled over rocks nearby. There's food in my saddlebag, jerky and hardtack. Not much of a wedding feast, I'm afraid. Better than a wedding feast with the wrong groom, Emma replied, taking the battered coffee pot he offered. As night fell, they sat beside the small fire, the coffee pot nestled in the coals, and the simple meal spread between them. Emma had finally managed to extricate herself from the worst constraints of her wedding dress, removing the outer layer to reveal the simpler shift underneath, which was still more modest than most day dresses. "Tell me about your brother's ranch," she prompted, eager to learn more about her rescuer and what lay ahead. Jackson's face softened as he spoke of his family's spread outside of Flagstaff. "My brother James took over after our pa died 5 years back. It's good land, plenty of water, decent grazing. We run about 500 head of cattle. James married last year and his wife Lily's expecting their first child come winter. And what about you? Do you work on the ranch as well?" A shadow passed over Jackson's features. "I did. Then the war came and I enlisted. When I came back, I found I couldn't settle. Been drifting mostly, taking work where I can find it. I go back to help during roundup and branding, but..." He shrugged, leaving the thought unfinished. Emma sensed there was more to his story, pain that he kept carefully contained. "The war changed many men," she said softly. "That it did." He stared into the fire, his expression distant. "You lose parts of yourself that you never get back." He seemed to catch himself then, offering her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But that's enough about that. What about you? Besides having the good sense to run from a bad marriage, what's your story, Emma Vaughn?" Emma wrapped her arms around her knees, considering the question. "There's not much to tell. My mother died last year consumption. My father, well, he's always been more concerned with appearances and position than happiness. When Thomas showed interest, father saw only the advantages of being connected to the Blackwater family. And your aunt in California. Will she welcome you?" "I believe so. She and my mother were close before mother married father and moved to Arizona. Aunt Clara wrote that I would always have a place with her, though I doubt she expected me to arrive as a runaway bride." Emma sighed, running her fingers through her tangled hair, now free of its elaborate wedding style. "I have her address. Once I reach California, I'll find her." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Flagstaff to California is still a fair journey, but safer than traveling alone from here. We can see about getting you on a stagecoach from there." The thought of continuing her journey alone after reaching Flagstaff brought an unexpected pang of dismay. In just a few hours, Jackson Edwards had become her anchor in a world suddenly turned upside down. The idea of saying goodbye so soon was unsettling. "How long to reach your brother's ranch?" she asked. 4 days if the weather holds and we don't run into any trouble." Jackson poured her another cup of coffee. "Which reminds me, we should see about getting you some proper traveling clothes tomorrow. That wedding dress, pretty as it is, isn't made for the trail." Emma glanced down at her disheveled attire. "I don't have any money. I've got a little set aside. There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here. We can stop there." When Emma began to protest, he held up a hand. "Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you're settled with your aunt." His kindness moved her deeply. "Thank you, Jackson, for everything." He nodded, suddenly appearing uncomfortable with her gratitude. "We should get some sleep. Dawn comes early out here." He pulled a bedroll from his pack, shaking it out. "You take this. I'll be fine with my saddle and blanket." As Emma settled onto the bedroll, the enormity of the changes in her life in just one day washed over her. This morning, she had been preparing to walk down the aisle to a man she feared. Tonight, she was sleeping beneath the stars with a stranger who had risked himself to help her. Jackson. She called softly. He was already stretched out on the other side of the fire, his hat pulled low over his face. "Why did you come behind the church today? What were you doing there?" There was a long pause, and she thought perhaps he had already fallen asleep. "I was paying my respects," he finally said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "There's a small cemetery behind that church. My best friend is buried there. He died at Gettysburg, but his family brought him home." Another pause. "I visit when I'm passing through." Emma felt the weight of his words, the grief still evident in his voice years after the war had ended. "I'm sorry. Get some sleep, Emma. Tomorrow's a long day." She closed her eyes, listening to the crackling fire and the distant call of a coyote. For the first time in longer than she could remember, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Emma felt safe. The dawn arrived with a canvas of pink and gold painted across the eastern sky. Emma awoke to the aroma of coffee and the quiet movements of Jackson tending the fire. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. The open sky above her instead of her bedroom ceiling, the hard ground beneath the bedroll instead of her mattress. Then the memories of the previous day came rushing back. Her flight from the church, the desperate ride across the prairie, the cowboy who had come to her rescue. "Morning," Jackson greeted, noticing she was awake. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Emma sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair in a futile attempt to bring some order to it. "Thank you." He handed her a tin cup filled with the steaming liquid. "Not much for breakfast, I'm afraid. Some jerky and the last of the hardtack." "We can get proper supplies at the trading post." Emma accepted both the coffee and the simple fare, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. They had eaten little the night before, and the stress of her escape had consumed any appetite she might have had. "How did you sleep?" Jackson asked, checking the cinch on his saddle. "Better than I expected to," Emma admitted, "though I'm feeling every minute in the saddle yesterday." She winced as she stretched stiff muscles. Jackson grinned. "It gets easier. By the time we reach Flagstaff, you'll be riding like you were born to it." They broke camp efficiently, Jackson clearly accustomed to this nomadic existence. Emma did what she could to help, folding the bedroll and washing the coffee cups in the nearby stream. The wedding dress was a lost cause, torn, dirty, and completely impractical for travel. She had removed what she could of the bulkier elements, leaving herself in the simpler underdress and petticoat, which would have to suffice until they reached the trading post. As they rode out, the morning sun warming their backs, Emma found herself studying Jackson's profile. In the clear light of day, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of years squinting against the sun, and a small scar that ran along his jawline. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, but also a wariness that spoke of hard-won experience. "Tell me about your friend," she said as they traversed a wide meadow dotted with wildflowers. "The one you were visiting at the cemetery." Jackson was silent for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "Ethan Miller. We grew up together. His family's farm bordered my father's ranch. When the war broke out, we enlisted together, two young fools thinking we were invincible." He adjusted his hat, pulling it lower against the sun's glare. "We were separated after training, different regiments. I didn't see him again until Gettysburg. By then." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "By then, I'd seen enough to know we weren't invincible after all. Neither had he." "You were there when he died?" Emma asked gently. Jackson nodded, his back stiff. "I held him while he bled out from a mini-A ball to the chest. He asked me to tell his mother he wasn't afraid, but he was. We all were." He fell silent again, then added, "I made a promise to him that I'd visit when I could, tell him about the places I'd seen. Sounds foolish, I suppose." "No," Emma said firmly. "It sounds like loyalty, like love." Jackson glanced back at her, surprise evident in his expression, followed by a flicker of gratitude. "I reckon that's what it is." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing cadence beneath them. Emma found her thoughts returning to her own situation. By now, Thomas and her father would be in a rage, perhaps even organizing a search. They would not take her defiance lightly. "Do you think they're looking for me?" she asked, voicing her fears. Jackson considered this. "Your father may be Blackwater, hard to say. Men like him, men used to power and getting their way, they don't take kindly to being publicly humiliated. But he's also a businessman, might decide you're not worth the trouble." "You don't know Thomas," Emma said grimly. "His pride won't let this go, and my father. He had much to gain from the marriage. He'll be furious. Well, we've got a good head start, and I'm taking us on a route few would think to follow. By the time we reach Flagstaff, the worst of their anger will have cooled." Emma wasn't so sure, but she appreciated his attempt to reassure her. "I've never been to Flagstaff. What's it like?" Jackson's expression lightened. "It's a good town." busy with the railroad coming through, surrounded by mountains and pine forests cooler than what you're used to in Willow Creek. The ranch is about an hour's ride outside town. He paused, then added, "My brother and Lily will welcome you. They're good people." The thought of meeting his family both comforted and unnerved Emma. What would they think of a woman who had fled her own wedding? Would they judge her for the impropriety of traveling alone with a man not her husband? "Jackson," she began hesitantly, "your family. Will they think less of me for what I've done? For traveling with you?" He turned in the saddle to look at her fully, his blue eyes serious. "Emma, you showed courage yesterday. You chose a difficult path rather than a lifetime of misery and mistreatment. Anyone worth knowing would respect that decision." A small smile touched his lips. "Besides, James knows me well enough to know I'd never compromise a lady's reputation. And Lily, well, Lily has a soft heart for those in need. She'll probably have you set up with a new wardrobe and a plan for your future before supper is cleared." His confidence eased some of her anxiety, and Emma found herself looking forward to meeting these people who had shaped the man who had come to her rescue so unexpectedly. By midday, the trading post came into view, a low, sprawling building of rough-hewn logs with a corral to one side and several wagons parked nearby. As they approached, Emma could see a few horses tied at hitching posts and smoke rising from the chimney. "Best if I do the talking," Jackson advised as they dismounted. "These places can be rough, and a woman alone tends to draw attention. Stay close." Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. Her white underdress was hardly proper attire, and her hair, falling loose around her shoulders, would mark her as either a woman of questionable morals or someone in distress. Neither would serve her well. The interior of the trading post was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for Emma's eyes to adjust. The space was crowded with merchandise, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves lined with canned goods, tools hanging from the rafters, bolts of fabric stacked on rough tables. A heavy-set man with a bushy beard stood behind a counter, eyeing them with mild curiosity. "Afternoon," Jackson greeted, stepping forward with a casual confidence that Emma envied. "My wife and I are traveling to Flagstaff. Had some trouble on the trail, pack mule spooked and ran off with most of our things. Looking to resupply." The man behind the counter nodded, his gaze moving to Emma with renewed interest. "Sorry to hear that, mister. What you needing?" "Traveling clothes for the missus here," Jackson said, placing a protective hand at the small of Emma's back. "Some foodstuffs, ammunition for my rifle, maybe a blanket or two. Got all that," the man replied. "Ladies' things are over yonder." He gestured toward a corner where several dresses hung from pegs on the wall. "Mrs. Miller can help with the fitting if needed." "Martha," he called toward a back room. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. Her kind face broke into a smile when she saw Emma. "Land sakes, child, you look like you've been through an ordeal. Come along, let's see what we can find to make you more comfortable." Emma shot Jackson a grateful look as she followed Mrs. Miller to the corner with the women's clothing. The older woman pulled down several items, holding them up against Emma's frame with a practiced eye. "Lost your things on the trail, did you?" she asked, her tone conversational but her sharp eyes assessing. "Yes," Emma replied, sticking to the story Jackson had established. "It was quite sudden. I'm afraid all I had left was what I was wearing." Mrs. Miller hummed thoughtfully. "Well, you're a bit taller than most, but I think this will do nicely." She held up a serviceable brown skirt and cream-colored blouse, "and you'll be needing proper undergarments, stockings, a nightgown. Perhaps a shawl for the evening chill. The nights get cool in these parts, even in summer." Before long, Emma had a modest pile of clothing, including a sturdy pair of boots that were only slightly too large, stuff the toes with cotton, dear, and they'll serve well enough, and a broad-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun. Meanwhile, Jackson had been gathering the other supplies they needed: food, ammunition, cooking utensils, and an extra canteen. When Emma emerged from behind a makeshift screen, dressed in her new clothing with her hair neatly braided and pinned up under the hat, he paused in his negotiations with the shopkeeper, his eyes widening slightly. "That's better," he said, a note of approval in his voice that sent an unexpected flutter through Emma's chest. The total cost of their purchases made Emma wince far more than she had expected, and all of it on Jackson's account. She had nothing to contribute, not even a wedding ring to sell. The realization of her complete dependence on his generosity was humbling. As they packed their new supplies onto Jackson's horse, Emma voiced her concern. "Jackson, I had no idea it would cost so much. I promise I'll repay you as soon as I'm able." He secured a bundle to the saddle, his movements efficient. "Don't trouble yourself about it. Money's just a tool like any other, only matters what you do with it." "Still, it's a debt I intend to honor," she insisted. Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. "If it matters that much to you, we'll keep an accounting, but right now, we need to make some miles before sundown." They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they moved west and north. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and piñon pines. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and Emma was grateful for the shawl misses Miller had insisted she would need. Jackson seemed more relaxed now that they had put some distance between themselves and Willow Creek, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or sharing stories of his travels. Emma found herself laughing at his tales of misadventures on cattle drives and the characters he'd encountered in frontier towns. "You've lived quite a life," she remarked, as they made camp that evening in a sheltered draw near a small spring. "I feel as though I've hardly lived at all in comparison." Jackson was busy preparing a more substantial meal than they'd had the previous night, using some of their newly acquired provisions. "Different paths, that's all. You've had your own adventures," Emma snorted softly. "Hardly. Before yesterday, the most adventurous thing I'd ever done was read a novel my father would have disapproved of." "And yet," Jackson countered, stirring a pot of beans cooking over the fire, "when the moment came to choose your own path, you had the courage to do it." "That counts for something, Emma Vaughn." His words warmed her more than the fire. "Perhaps, but I still feel as though I've spent my life in a very small, carefully controlled space. Even my escape was only possible because you happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Maybe," Jackson conceded, "but you'd have found another way if I hadn't been there. You strike me as a woman of determination." The meal they shared that night was simple but satisfying: beans, bacon, and fresh biscuits that Jackson somehow managed to bake in a small cast iron pot nestled in the coals of their fire. As they ate, seated side by side on a fallen log, Emma found herself studying the man who had so unexpectedly changed the course of her life. In just 2 days, Jackson Edwards had shown himself to be kind, capable, and far more complex than she might have initially assumed. A cowboy with the soul of a poet, a warrior carrying the weight of war's scars, a wanderer who maintained connections to family and fallen friends. She was drawn to him in ways that both excited and frightened her. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am that you were the one to find me behind that church." Jackson's expression softened. "I've been thinking the same thing, though for different reasons, I suspect." Their eyes held for a moment longer than was proper, and Emma felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither had anticipated. Then Jackson cleared his throat and turned his attention back to his plate. "Tomorrow we'll be entering rougher country," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "The trail narrows and climbs for a good stretch. We'll need to take it slower, so it'll be a longer day in the saddle." Emma nodded, accepting the change in subject while holding on to the warmth of the moment they'd just shared. "I'll be ready." That night, as she settled into her bedroll, now supplemented with a proper blanket from the trading post, Emma found herself contemplating the strange turns her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been resigned to a life she dreaded, seeing no escape from her father's plans for her. Now she was sleeping beneath the vast canopy of stars, traveling toward an uncertain future with a man who stirred feelings in her that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, Emma fell asleep with a sense of anticipation rather than dread for what the next day would bring. The promised rough country arrived midway through the following day. The trail narrowed as it wound upward through increasingly rocky terrain, forcing them to proceed at a much slower pace. Jackson dismounted to lead his horse through particularly treacherous stretches, his hand steady on the bridle. "Almost to the top," he assured Emma as they paused to rest in the shade of a massive boulder. "The view's worth the climb." He was right. When they finally crested the ridge, Emma gasped at the panorama spread before them. Rolling hills gave way to distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Forests of pine and spruce carpeted the lower slopes in a dark green mantle, while meadows dotted with wildflowers created vibrant splashes of color across the landscape. "It's beautiful," she breathed, drinking in the vastness of it. "I've never seen anything like it." "This is why I could never stay in one place for too long after the war," Jackson admitted, his voice quiet beside her. "There's too much to see. Too much beauty in the world to be contained in a single patch of ground." Emma glanced at him, struck by the passion in his words. "And yet you're returning to your brother's ranch now." A shadow crossed his face. "For a time, James needs help with the summer roundup and with Lily expecting." He shrugged. "Family obligations." "But you won't stay," Emma guessed. "I haven't yet." His admission held a note of regret. "Though sometimes I think about it, having a place of my own, putting down roots." "What stops you?" Jackson was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. After the war, everything felt confined, like the walls were closing in. Out here, he gestured to the expansive view before them. "I can breathe. I can remember who I was before." Emma understood then that his wandering wasn't merely restlessness, but a form of healing, a way of reclaiming parts of himself that the war had threatened to destroy. "And has it worked? Have you found him? The man you were before?" A smile touched Jackson's lips, though it carried a hint of sadness. "Not entirely, but I've found something else. A different version, maybe, one that can live with what happened." His honesty moved her deeply. In that moment, Emma wished she could reach out, bridge the physical and emotional distance between them. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for sharing this with me, both the view and the truth." Jackson met her eyes then, and something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps. Two people who had faced very different challenges, but who understood the need to forge one's own path. "We should keep moving," he said finally, though he seemed reluctant to break the moment. "There's a good camping spot about 2 hours ahead, creek nearby for water, and enough grazing for the horse." They continued their journey in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the trail began its gradual descent from the ridge. The afternoon stretched on, golden light slanting through the trees as the sun moved toward the western horizon. Their campsite that night was as perfect as Jackson had promised, a small clearing near a bubbling creek, sheltered by tall pines that whispered in the gentle evening breeze. Emma helped gather wood for the fire while Jackson tended to his horse, the routine of making camp already becoming familiar to her. As they sat beside the fire after their evening meal, Emma found herself drawn back to their conversation on the ridge. "Have you ever considered that putting down roots might not feel confining if it was a choice freely made? If it was a place and people you truly loved?" Jackson poked at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks upward. "I suppose that's possible. Haven't found the right place or people yet, I guess." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "What about you? Before all this happened, did you ever think about what kind of life you wanted, if you had been free to choose?" Emma hugged her knees to her chest, considering the question. "I used to dream about having my own little house somewhere quiet, a garden out back, books everywhere." She smiled at the simplicity of her fantasy. "Nothing grand, just mine, a place where I could make my own decisions, live by my own rules." "That sounds nice," Jackson said softly. "What about family?" Emma asked, then blushed at her own boldness. "I mean, did you ever think about having one of your own, wife, children?" "Once," he admitted. "Before the war, there was a girl, Elizabeth. We had an understanding, or so I thought. When I came back, she was married to a banker from St. Louis." He shrugged, but Emma could see the hurt still lingered. "Can't blame her. 4 years is a long time to wait, especially when letters were few and far between. I'm sorry, Emma said. Don't be. It worked out for the best. She has a good life, from what I hear, and he gestured to the wilderness around them. I have this, freedom, no one depending on me, no one to disappoint. Is that really freedom, though? Emma asked gently. Being alone, Jackson looked startled by the question. I've never thought about it that way. Maybe true freedom is having connections that you choose, Emma suggested. People who accept you as you are, who give you room to be yourself within the relationship. Maybe, Jackson conceded, studying her with new interest. That's a wise perspective for someone so young, Emma laughed. I'm 22, Jackson, not a child. No, he agreed, his gaze lingering on her face in the firelight. Definitely not a child. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch, and for a moment, Emma thought he might lean across the small space between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and stood. We should get some sleep. Another long day tomorrow. Despite her disappointment at the broken moment, Emma recognized the wisdom in his restraint. They were still virtual strangers, thrown together by circumstance. Whatever was growing between them needed time and space to develop naturally. Good night, Jackson, she said, settling into her bedroll. Good night, Emma, he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that followed her into sleep. The next day brought them deeper into the forested mountains, the air noticeably cooler at the higher elevation. They made good progress, and by late afternoon, Jackson announced they were less than a day's ride from his brother's ranch. We'll reach Pine Creek by tomorrow afternoon, he said as they paused to rest the horse near a small mountain lake. James will be surprised to see me. I wasn't expected for another week or so. Do you think he'll mind that you've brought company? Emma asked, suddenly anxious about imposing on his family. Jackson smiled reassuringly. James and Lily have the most welcoming home I've ever known. They take in strays of all kinds, two-legged and four-legged alike. You'll be welcome there, Emma. I promise. They made camp that night in a meadow carpeted with wildflowers, the distant peaks of the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. After their simple supper, they sat side by side on a fallen log, watching as the first stars appeared overhead. Tell me about your mother, Jackson said unexpectedly. You mentioned she died last year. What was she like? Emma smiled at the memory of her mother's gentle face. She was kind. Patient. She loved poetry and would read to me for hours when I was a child. My father thought it frivolous, but he indulged her because he loved her in his way. She sounds like a special woman. She was, Emma agreed. She was also much stronger than anyone realized. She stood up to my father when it mattered most, though she did it quietly in ways that allowed him to save face. Is that where you get your courage from? Jackson asked, his shoulder brushing against hers as he shifted on the log. Emma considered this. Perhaps. Though I never thought of myself as particularly courageous until I ran away from my own wedding, Jackson chuckled. That does take a certain boldness. What about your parents? Emma asked. Good people, Jackson replied. Hardworking, my father was stern but fair. My mother was the heart of our family, always had room at her table for anyone who needed a meal, always had a kind word for those who were struggling. His expression softened with the memory. She died while I was away at war, influenza. By the time I received the letter, she'd been gone for months. I'm so sorry, Jackson. He nodded his acknowledgement of her sympathy. My father lasted another year after I returned. I think he was holding on just to see me come home. Once he knew I was safe, he let go. Jackson stared into the flames of their campfire. He never said it, but I think he was disappointed in the man who came back from the war, different from the boy who left. Emma reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. I can't imagine anyone being disappointed in the man you are, Jackson Edwards. He turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. You don't know everything about me, Emma, the things I've done, the man I've been. I know enough, she said firmly. I know you stopped to help a stranger in distress. I know you've treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. I know you honor your promises to those you've lost and keep faith with your family despite your need for freedom. Jackson's eyes, reflecting the firelight, searched her face. You see the best in people. I see you, Emma replied simply. This time, when the moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings, Jackson didn't pull away. Instead, he raised his free hand to gently touch her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "Emma," he said, her name a question and a plea all at once. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. Yes. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as Emma responded, her hand moving to rest against his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. Jackson's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Emma felt as though she were falling into a dream she never wanted to wake from. When they finally separated, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan for this," he admitted. "When I found you behind that church, I only meant to help someone in need. And now," Emma whispered, "now I'm not sure I can imagine riding away from you when we reach Flagstaff," he confessed. "But I don't want to be another man making decisions about your life, Emma. You've just escaped that fate. You deserve the chance to find your own way." His consideration, his respect for her autonomy even at the cost of his own desires, only deepened Emma's growing feelings for him. "What if my own way includes you, Jackson? What if that's what I choose?" "Then I'd be the luckiest man alive," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But let's not rush. We've still got time to figure things out, and you should meet James and Lily, see the ranch. Make sure it's a place you could be happy." Emma nodded, appreciating his caution even as her heart sang with newfound joy. "That seems wise." They sat together by the fire for a long while after that, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. When they finally settled into their separate bedrolls, Emma found sleep elusive, her mind and heart too full of the day's revelations. She had left Willow Creek running from a loveless marriage arranged for convenience and financial gain. Never had she imagined that in less than a week, she would find herself falling in love with a man who embodied everything she had ever dreamed of in a partner's strength, balanced with kindness, courage tempered by compassion, and a deep respect for her as an equal. As sleep finally claimed her, Emma's last thought was that perhaps running away from her wedding had been not just an escape, but also the first step toward the life she was truly meant to live. The final day of their journey dawned clear and bright. They broke camp early, both eager to reach the ranch and see what awaited them there. The landscape grew more familiar to Jackson as they rode, and he pointed out landmarks with increasing frequency: a distinctive rock formation, an ancient lightning-struck tree, a bend in the creek where he had caught his first trout as a boy. By early afternoon, they crested a hill to find a sprawling valley below them. Nestled against the base of a pine-covered mountain was a cluster of buildings, a large main house built of logs with a wide porch wrapping around it, a barn and corral, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "Pine Creek Ranch," Jackson announced, a note of pride in his voice despite his complicated relationship with the place. "Home, such as it is." Emma took in the scene, struck by the beauty of the setting and the evident prosperity of the operation. "It's lovely, Jackson." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "James has done well with it, better than our father ever managed, truth be told." He clicked to his horse, urging it down the slope toward the ranch. "Come on, I can practically taste Lily's cooking already." Their arrival caused an immediate stir. A tall man who bore a striking resemblance to Jackson emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun as he watched their approach. A ranch hand working in the corral paused in his task, and a dog came bounding across the yard, barking enthusiastically. "Jackson Edwards, as I live and breathe," the tall man called out as they drew nearer. "You're a week early and with company, no less." Jackson dismounted, helping Emma down before turning to greet his brother with a firm handshake that quickly turned into an embrace. "James, good to see you." James Edwards clapped his brother on the back, then turned curious eyes to Emma. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Emma Vaughn," Jackson said, a protective hand at the small of her back. "Emma, my brother James." "Miss Vaughn," James said with a nod of greeting. "Welcome to Pine Creek." Before Emma could respond, the door of the main house opened, and a woman appeared on the porch. She was petite, with warm brown hair and a visibly pregnant belly. Her face lit up at the sight of the visitors. "Jackson," she called, hurrying down the steps as quickly as her condition would allow. What a wonderful surprise. Jackson met her halfway, embracing her carefully. Lily, you're looking well. Motherhood agrees with you. Lily laughed, placing a hand on her rounded stomach. Well, we'll see about that in a few months when this little one is keeping us up all night. Her gaze moved to Emma, standing somewhat uncertainly beside the horse. And who have you brought us? Introductions were made again, and Emma was immediately enveloped in a warm hug by Lily Edwards. Any friend of Jackson's is welcome here, she declared. You both must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside, I've got coffee on the stove, and there's still some pie left from yesterday. As they followed Lily toward the house, James fell into step beside Jackson, speaking in a low voice. A mighty pretty traveling companion you've found yourself, brother. There's a story there, I'd wager. There is, Jackson agreed, but it's hers to tell if she chooses. James raised an eyebrow at that but didn't press further. Well, she's welcome here as long as she likes. Any woman who can put that look in your eye is someone I want to know better. What look? Jackson asked, genuinely confused. James just smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. You'll figure it out. The main house was as welcoming inside as out, spacious rooms furnished with a combination of well-crafted pieces and comfortable, practical items. A stone fireplace dominated the large front room, with a kitchen and dining area visible beyond. Photographs and handmade quilts adorned the walls, giving the space a distinctly homey feel. Lily ushered them to the kitchen table, insisting they sit while she served coffee and generous slices of apple pie. Now, she said, settling across from them with her own cup, tell us everything. Jackson's letters are always so brief, they barely qualify as correspondence. Emma glanced at Jackson, uncertain how much to reveal about their circumstances. Emma and I met in Willow Creek, Jackson began, seeming to choose his words carefully. She was in a difficult situation, and I offered to escort her to Flagstaff. Her ultimate destination is California, where she has family. Lily's perceptive eyes moved between them. A difficult situation. Emma took a deep breath, deciding that honesty was the best approach with these people who had welcomed her so warmly. I was to be married to a man I neither loved nor trusted. When I discovered his true nature, his cruelty, I fled from the church just before the ceremony was to begin. Jackson found me hiding and helped me escape. James whistled low. That explains why you're wearing a wedding band, but Jackson isn't, he observed, nodding toward the ring Emma had forgotten she still wore, the one Thomas had placed on her finger during the rehearsal, insisting she keep it on until the ceremony. Emma twisted the gold band, suddenly desperate to be free of it. I should have thrown this away days ago. She pulled it off and set it on the table, feeling lighter without its weight. It was never a symbol of love, only of ownership. Lily reached across the table to squeeze her hand. You poor dear, what courage it must have taken to run away like that. Jackson deserves the credit, Emma insisted. Without him, I wouldn't have made it far. I just provided the horse, Jackson said with a small smile. The courage was all Emma's. James and Lily exchanged a look that Emma couldn't quite interpret, but it seemed approving. Well, James said, you're both welcome to stay as long as you need. We've plenty of room, and an extra pair of hands is always useful during roundup season. Thank you, Emma said, genuinely touched by their acceptance. I don't want to impose, but I would be happy to help around the house in exchange for your hospitality. Lily waved this off. Nonsense. You're a guest, not hired help, though I wouldn't turn down some assistance with the mending. These cowboys are hard on their clothes, and with the baby coming, I'm finding it harder to keep up with everything. I'd be glad to help with that, Emma assured her. I'm quite handy with a needle. As they finished their pie and coffee, James and Jackson fell into a discussion about the upcoming roundup and the state of the herd. Lily, sensing Emma's fatigue from the journey, offered to show her to a room where she could rest and freshen up. Jackson can bring your things up later, she said, leading Emma up a wooden staircase to the second floor of the house. We keep a guest room ready. It's small but comfortable. The room was indeed modest but charming, a single bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror above it, a small table near the window that overlooked the mountains to the west. A pitcher and basin sat on the dresser, and Lily quickly poured fresh water for Emma to wash with. There's a proper bath downstairs, she explained. I'll have one of the hands bring up hot water later if you'd like a soak. Does wonders after days in the saddle. That would be wonderful, Emma admitted, her muscles still protesting despite growing accustomed to riding. Thank you, Lily. You're very kind to take in a stranger this way. Lily smiled, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. Any woman brave enough to run from a bad marriage rather than resign herself to it is welcome in my home. She paused, then added with a twinkle in her eye, besides, I've never seen Jackson look at anyone the way he looks at you. That alone would earn you a place here. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. We've only known each other a few days. Sometimes a few days is all it takes, Lily replied simply. James and I knew within a week that we would marry. When it's right, it's right. She moved toward the door. Rest now, dinner's at 6, but come down whenever you're ready. Make yourself at home. Left alone, Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, overcome by the events of the past 5 days. From near disaster to unexpected rescue, from a journey across the wilderness to arrival at this welcoming home, from fleeing a loveless marriage to finding unexpected feelings for a man she barely knew, it seemed too much to process all at once. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Lily with fresh towels or some other comfort. Instead, Jackson entered, carrying her small bundle of belongings from the trading post. James helped me see to the horse, he said, setting the bundle on the dresser. Thought you might want your things. Thank you, Emma said, suddenly shy in this new context, no longer travelers sharing a campfire but a man and woman beneath the roof of his family home. Jackson lingered near the door, seeming equally uncertain. Are you comfortable? Is there anything else you need? Emma shook her head. Lily has been very kind. Everything is perfect. Good. Jackson nodded, then took a step toward her. Emma, I wanted to say, there's no pressure here, no expectations. If you decide you want to continue to California as planned, I'll help you arrange it. If you want to stay longer, get your bearings before deciding what's next, that's fine too. He hesitated, then added, and if you're wondering about what's happened between us these past few days, you should know that I meant what I said. I care for you more than I expected to. But I want you to have the freedom to choose your own path. His consideration moved her deeply. Here was a man so different from Thomas Blackwater, a man who valued her autonomy above his own desires, who saw her as a person worthy of respect rather than a possession to be controlled. Emma rose from the bed and crossed to where he stood. Jackson, she said softly, from the moment you found me behind that church, every choice I've made has been my own, including this one. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I care for you too. More than I thought possible in such a short time. The tension in Jackson's shoulders eased visibly at her words. So what happens now? Now, Emma said, I think we give ourselves time to know each other better, time to see if what we're feeling is real and lasting. She smiled up at him. And in the meantime, I believe your brother could use an extra hand with roundup season. Jackson's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. That sounds like a fine plan, Miss Vaughn. He leaned down to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that carried the promise of more to come. When they parted, his eyes were alight with a happiness Emma had not seen in them before. I'll see you at dinner, he said, reluctantly stepping back toward the door. Rest well, Emma. You too, Jackson. As the door closed behind him, Emma turned to look out the window at the beautiful landscape surrounding Pine Creek Ranch. The future stretched before her, no longer a predetermined path but a range of possibilities as vast as the western sky. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free to choose her own destiny, free to follow her heart. And her heart, it seemed, had chosen Jackson Edwards. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm as natural as breathing. Emma quickly found her place within the household, helping Lily with cooking and mending, learning the workings of the ranch, and spending evenings on the porch with the Edwards family, listening to their stories and sharing bits of her own life. Jackson and James were often away during daylight hours, working with the ranch hands to round up cattle from the far-flung pastures, but evenings brought everyone together around the large dining table. These meals became Emma's favorite time of day, the comfortable banter between the brothers, Lily's gentle teasing, the sense of belonging that grew stronger with each passing night. Her relationship with Jackson developed slowly, built on meaningful conversations and shared experiences rather than rushed passion. They took walks in the evening, rode out to his favorite spots on the property during his rare free afternoons, and discovered with delight how many common interests they shared despite their different backgrounds. 3 weeks after their arrival at Pine Creek, they rode to a high meadow overlooking the entire valley. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of color, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape. They had packed a simple picnic bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine that James had insisted they take. "It's even more beautiful than you described," Emma said as they spread a blanket beneath the shade of a towering pine. "I can see why this is your favorite spot." Jackson handed her a slice of apple. "I used to come up here as a boy when I needed to think. During the war, I'd picture it when things got bad, a reminder of what I was fighting to come home to." Emma leaned against his shoulder, content in the comfortable silence that fell between them. So much had changed in the month since she had fled her wedding. The desperate bride hiding behind the church was now a woman finding her strength, discovering talents and interests she had never been allowed to explore. Lily had been teaching her to make medicines from the herbs in her garden, and Emma had shown a natural aptitude for it. James had praised her organizational skills when she had offered to help with the ranch's account books, which had fallen into disarray during Lily's pregnancy. She was becoming not just a guest, but an integral part of the household, her contributions valued and appreciated. And through it all, Jackson had been her constant companion, never pushing but always present, his feelings for her evident in every glance, every touch, every consideration large and small. The cowboy who had led her out from the shadows into the light was now the man she knew without doubt that she loved. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, noticing her pensive expression. "Everything," Emma admitted. "How much my life has changed." "How grateful I am that you found me that day." Jackson took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about that too, about how finding you changed everything for me as well." Emma looked up at him, curious. "How so?" He gazed out over the valley, gathering his thoughts. "I told you how after the war I couldn't seem to settle anywhere, how even coming home to the ranch felt confining." He squeezed her hand gently. "But these past weeks with you here, it's different. For the first time since before the war, I'm not feeling that restlessness, that need to move on." Hope bloomed in Emma's chest. "What are you saying, Jackson?" He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious. "I'm saying that I love you, Emma Vaughn, that somehow in the space of a month you've become essential to me. That the thought of you continuing on to California alone tears at my heart." "Jackson," Emma breathed, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "I know it's soon," he hurried on. "I know we've only just begun to know each other. But I also know what I feel, and it's more real than anything I've felt before." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to change your plans if California is truly where you want to go, but I'm asking if I might be part of those plans. If you might consider building a life with me, whether it's here at Pine Creek or somewhere else entirely." Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing, this proud, independent man offering to follow her wherever she chose to go, putting her dreams and desires on equal footing with his own. It was everything Thomas Blackwater would never have done, everything her father had never considered important. "Jackson Edwards," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling within her. "I love you too, and as for California," she smiled through her tears, "I think I've already found the home I was looking for. If James and Lily are willing to have me stay, I'd like to make my life here. With you." The joy that transformed Jackson's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss deep and thorough, sealing their declaration with all the passion that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure, Emma? This is a hard life, especially for someone who wasn't raised to it." "I'm sure," she said without hesitation. "I've never been happier than I've been these past weeks. This land, this life, it suits me in ways I never expected, And you, Jackson, you are everything I never dared to hope for." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "I should probably do this properly," he said, shifting to one knee before her. He took her hand, his expression solemn despite the joy radiating from him. "Emma Vaughn, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my heart's companion for all the days to come?" "Yes," Emma said simply, her heart too full for elaborate words. "Yes, I will marry you, Jackson Edwards." He slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "James kept it for me, said I'd know when the time was right to give it to someone." Emma stared at the ring, touched beyond words by the significance of the gift. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then looked up at him with a sudden realization. "James knew." "That you were planning to propose," Jackson laughed, settling beside her again on the blanket. "James knew before I did, I think. He gave me the ring this morning with a knowing look and said, 'About time, little brother. Lily's been dropping hints for 2 weeks now.'" "They approve then." "They love you," Jackson said simply. "Almost as much as I do." Emma leaned into his embrace, happiness washing over her in waves. The future stretched before them, bright with promise. She thought of the desperate bride she had been, hiding behind the church in terror and despair. That woman could never have imagined this outcome, found by a cowboy who would lead her not just out from her hiding place, but into a life filled with love, purpose, and belonging. "Should we ride back and tell them?" she asked after a while, reluctant to leave their peaceful meadow but eager to share their joy with James and Lily. Jackson brushed a kiss against her temple. "Soon. But let's stay just a little longer. I want to remember this moment exactly as it is, you and me, the mountains, the sunset. The beginning of our story." Emma nodded, content to remain in this perfect moment. "Our story," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." As the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, Emma and Jackson sat entwined on their blanket, planning their future together. The conversation ranged from practical matters, where they would live, how they would contribute to the ranch, to dreams of the family they hoped to create together. "I never thought I'd find this," Jackson admitted as twilight deepened around them. "After the war, I resigned myself to a solitary life. I convinced myself it was what I wanted, freedom from attachments, from the risk of loss. And now," Emma asked, her head resting on his shoulder, "now I understand that true freedom isn't about the absence of connections. It's about choosing the right ones." He tightened his arm around her. "You were right that night by the campfire. The freedom to choose who to love, to build a life with someone who sees and accepts all of you, that's the only kind worth having." Emma lifted her face for his kiss, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in such a short time. From a bride fleeing a loveless marriage to a woman embracing a future filled with love and possibility, it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. As they packed up their picnic and mounted Jackson's horse for the ride back to the ranch, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Emma wrapped her arms around Jackson's waist, her cheek pressed against his back, and silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led him to find her behind that church and guide her out into the light of a new day and a new life. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning with the aspen leaves turned to gold against the deep green of the pines, Emma stood in the bedroom she now shared with Jackson in a small cabin they had built on the ranch property. Lily was with her, helping to arrange the simple veil atop Emma's carefully styled hair. "There," Lily said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful, Emma." Emma turned to the mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. The dress she wore was not the elaborate gown she had abandoned in Willow Creek, but a creation of her own design, simple ivory cotton with delicate embroidery she had done herself, inspired by the wildflowers of the high meadow where Jackson had proposed. "I can hardly believe this is happening," Emma confessed, smoothing a hand over the fabric. "Sometimes I worry I'll wake up and find it was all a dream, finding Jackson, coming here, all of it." Lily squeezed her hand. "It's real, my dear. As real as the love I see in my brother-in-law's eyes whenever he looks at you." She adjusted the veil one final time. "Now, are you ready?" James says the Reverend has arrived, and Jackson is probably wearing a hole in the porch floor with his pacing. Emma laughed, the sound bright with joy. I'm ready. They made their way downstairs and out to the garden behind the main house, where a small gathering awaited. The ranch hands stood in a respectful group, freshly shaved and wearing their Sunday best. A few neighbors had been invited, along with the doctor and his wife from town, who had become friends during Lily's pregnancy. At the end of a path strewn with autumn leaves stood Jackson, tall and handsome in a new suit, his eyes fixed on Emma as she approached on James's arm. The look of wonder and love on his face as he watched her walk toward him was everything Emma had ever dreamed of seeing in the eyes of the man she would marry. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not of obedience and ownership, but of partnership and respect, of love freely given and joyfully received. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect expression of the man he was, strong yet gentle, confident yet considerate. The celebration afterward was equally warm and unpretentious, a feast prepared by Lily and the ranch cook, music provided by one of the hands who played fiddle, dancing in the yard as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land that had become Emma's home. Happy, Mrs. Edwards? Jackson asked as they stole a moment alone, watching the festivities from the shade of an old apple tree. Perfectly, Emma replied, leaning into his embrace. And you, Mr. Edwards, no regrets about giving up your wandering ways? Jackson tipped her face up to his. The only regret I have is that it took me so long to find you. Think of all the time we could have had together. We have the rest of our lives, Emma reminded him, and I, for one, intend to make every day count. As do I, my love, Jackson said, sealing the promise with a kiss. As do I. 5 years later, Emma sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Jackson taught their 4-year-old son Matthew to ride his first pony. Their daughter Clara, just 2, sat on Emma's lap, clapping her chubby hands as her brother mastered staying balanced in the small saddle. Careful, Jackson, Emma called, though she knew her husband's protective hands would never leave their son until he was truly ready to ride independently. Jackson looked up with a grin that still made her heart skip after all these years. He's a natural, Emma, just like his mother. Emma laughed at that. Though she had become a competent horsewoman over the years, she would never have Jackson's innate bond with the animals. But their children seemed to have inherited their father's affinity for all creatures, great and small. Pine Creek Ranch had prospered under the combined efforts of the Edwards brothers and their wives. James and Lily's son was a year older than Matthew, and the 2 boys were inseparable cousins and best friends. The addition of children had completed the circle of family in ways that enriched all their lives. Emma's skills as a healer had grown under Lily's tutelage, and she now served as an unofficial midwife and herbalist for the surrounding area. Jackson had found his place as well, no longer restless but rooted in the land and family he loved. He still occasionally took trips to cattle auctions to escort a particularly valuable herd to market, but he always returned with the same eager joy, as if coming home to her was the culmination of every journey. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting the same golden light that had illuminated their first declaration of love in the high meadow, Jackson lifted Matthew from the pony and carried him back toward the cabin, the boy chattering excitedly about his adventure. Did you see me, Mama? I rode all by myself. I saw, my brave boy, Emma assured him, ruffling his hair brown like his father's but with a curl that came from her side. You're going to be a fine horseman like your papa. Jackson settled beside her on the porch swing, draping one arm around her shoulders while tickling Clara with his free hand. The little girl giggled, her blue eyes so like her father's sparkling with delight. I was thinking, Jackson said casually, though Emma detected an undercurrent of excitement in his voice. That meadow we rode to when I proposed it would be a perfect spot for a summer cabin. Somewhere we could take the children during the hottest weeks, teach them to fish in the high streams. What do you think? Emma smiled, recognizing his need to occasionally stretch beyond the boundaries of their daily life. I think it's a wonderful idea. The children would love it. And you, Jackson asked, always careful to consider her feelings as equal to his own. Would you love it too? Emma leaned against him, surveying the life they had built together, the thriving ranch, the healthy children, the bond between them that had only deepened with time and shared experiences. Jackson Edwards, I would love anything that brings our family joy. And I think a place in the mountains would be perfect. He kissed her then, a gesture as familiar and essential as breathing, yet still capable of sending a thrill through her after all these years. I love you, Emma Edwards, he murmured against her lips. More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow. And I love you, she replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them, always and completely. As twilight deepened around them, and their children's excitement gradually mellowed into the drowsiness that preceded bedtime, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate bride hiding behind a church to a woman fully at home in her life and herself, it was a transformation she could never have imagined on that fateful day. She thought of Thomas Blackwater and her father, who had eventually given up their search for her when it became clear she would not be found. A letter from her old friend in Willow Creek had informed her that Thomas had quickly found another bride, a wealthy merchant's daughter who had brought him the financial advantages he sought. Emma could only hope the woman had found the strength to stand up for herself in ways Emma never could have in that life. Her own path had led her to this moment, this perfect, ordinary evening with the family she adored, on land that had become as much a part of her as the air she breathed. The cowboy who had found her hiding place and led her into the light had become the center of her world, the partner in all her joys and sorrows, the love that defined her days. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked softly as Matthew leaned sleepily against his side and Clara's eyelids grew heavy. Emma smiled, meeting the gaze of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. I was thinking about beginnings. About how sometimes the end of one story is just the opening chapter of a much better one. Jackson nodded, understanding as he always did. And is it a better story? Emma looked at their children, at the home they had made, at the life they had created together. It's the best story, Jackson. One I never want to end. It won't, he promised, drawing her closer as the first stars appeared overhead. This is just the beginning, Emma. The best is yet to come. As they gathered their sleepy children and moved inside to the warmth of their home, Emma knew with absolute certainty that he was right. The bride who had hidden behind the church had found not just escape, but a destiny beyond her wildest dreams, led there by a cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle heart, who had shown her the way into the light of a love that would illuminate all her days to come.